Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we are so excited to interview on TV network, Ready to Love, author, everything. Okay. Attorney Symone Redwine needs no introduction. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have the chance to sit down with you again. Thank you for inviting me to be on your platform.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, of course, this is the Black Lawyers Podcast. We're rooting for everyone Black, 365, not just during Black History Month. And so we're really excited to bring on real attorneys, real celebrity advocates, real judges, all Black people in the law doing it, right? And you are one of those with all the celebrity cases that have been going on. I'm sure people have seen videos of you circulating, like Attorney Symone Redwine says, "Oh my girl, that is." So you have been definitely diving into a lot of the legal issues that have been surrounding a lot of trending cases, and so we wanted to steal you over to our platform to talk to us about that today. But before we get into this supersized episode of Hot Topics or Legal Hot Topics, we just wanted to have you reintroduce yourself to the audience that may not know a lot about you. So, first of all, why did you go to law school?
So I decided to be a lawyer because I wanted to help people, but I didn't want to be poor. So I decided that at a very young age. I come from a family of educators and school teachers, and they are so overworked and underpaid. So I thought, what are different careers I could help people, but not be poor?
Not
So,
before. Okay. Okay.
yes.
I
And
mean,
then
that's
also, exactly. And then also, I actually grew up as a child actress. So if you see me on any of the platforms, any of my platforms, breaking down legal cases, sometimes you'll see in the comments people say, well, what does she know? And some people are like, well, she's a lawyer. Yeah, and I'm a lawyer, but also I live this entertainment stuff. By the time I was 7 years old, I was in the Screen Actors Guild because I literally had worked that much. So I look at things both from the talent perspective and what they're going through, as well as the attorney lingo, the attorney lens.
okay.
Mhm.
Great. Great. So, with that being said, tell us what law school you went to and what was your favorite law school class?
Sure. So I went to Cornell University. I chose Cornell, hell, Cornell chose me. And I
Okay.
say that because I actually wanted to go. There was another school I wanted to go to. I won't say which one, but it was an HBCU. My homegirl, she and I were on the same undergrad scholarship, and she had gotten a full ride to that law school. And I was like, oh, okay, that's going to be my goal. And I received one as well. But then when she was there, she was like, girl, it's really competitive. It's super hard. And I learned that to maintain my full ride, I was going to have to stay in the top 15% of the class. I said, well, how many students are in the class? They said 150. I said, oh, Lord. I said, no, I had to stay in the top 10%. I was like, so I got to stay among the top 15. I was like, oh, that sounds very challenging. And there were different elements there. And then Cornell came through and they gave me about a 75% scholarship. And I
Okay.
was like, well, damn. And so I called Cornell and I said, well, wait a minute, what GPA do I have to stay here? And they said, well, ma'am, you have to remain in good standing. I said, well, what is that? They said, well, we don't know. We've never had anybody not in good standing. I said, I'll take it. I'll take it. And so that's how I ended up at Cornell Law School in Ithaca, New York.
In Ithaca, New York. What was your favorite class there?
None of them, honey. Ugh. I did a strong first year, and then
Mhm.
the second and third, I spent my time on the beaches in Miami and getting flued out. But I would say it would be the classes that I kind of made up. So one of them, it was white collar crime, and it was a
Mm.
seminar. And I would say one of the reasons it was my favorite class is throughout undergrad, one of my strategies for getting A's is whenever you have a class that has like this final project where you have to do a major paper,
Mhm.
if they gave me a list of the topics, I never picked those topics. I'd go to my professor and I'd say, "Hi, could I can I use this particular topic, which is more aligned with me learning about my culture?" For white collar crime, I said, "Could I do my final paper on the crack cocaine sentencing controversy?" He was like, "Sure, no one's ever written about it." Well, nobody wrote about it because it wasn't on the list of like 20 topics to pick from, right? But
Right.
because it wasn't on that list, he knew nothing about it. Whatever I said was educating the professor, Professors love learning new stuff. And I got an A, even though I never went to class and spent all my time on the beach with first round draft picks. So I had fun.
Oh my gosh. Well, if you're a law student, take some notes. That was a jewel right there on how to get an A in a class.
Oh yeah,
You
and I'm a professor now. I actually am at
yeah.
TSU, Thurgood Marshall School of Law in
Mhm.
Texas, where I developed my own class.
Okay.
Shout out to the dean of the law school. He was very open to this. It's a class. It's called Law Practice 2, but it's basically how to open your own practice and earn six figures without going to court.
Okay. Well, here, I mean, again, I think they're trying to aim for more practical classes in law school because a lot of times people are getting out if they're not at big or mid-sized firms, they're not really making a lot of money. They don't know how to hang their own shingles. So the fact that you're able to offer that class, I say that class needs to be offered everywhere. They should pay you to
Thank
create
you.
the curriculum and then
They
you
should.
hand it out to every single school. That definitely
They
should.
should. Because
It
my
should.
favorite part of the class is that it comes with templates. So at the
Oh,
end
I
of the
see.
class, you have the templates you need to be able to package LLCs for business formation, to sell
I see.
LLCs or corporate formation, to do expungements or non-disclosures in the state, or to also handle a car accident pre-litigation for the policy limits.
Look at that. So yes, that is if I'm sure a lot of people are listening. If you're listening, contact her office to pay her to build that curriculum for your school. Now I know you are teaching at TSU, but in addition to that, you are pretty much, I would say, a civil litigation attorney. You do personal injury
Correct.
and things like that. So
Mhm.
what is your maybe best piece of advice for someone that wants to be a civil litigation attorney? Because again, that's different from being transactional. You do have to be in the
Right.
courtroom. So what would be a tip for someone that would like to be a civil litigator?
So I would say number one, find good mentors. So what I did, the way I fell into this, prior to this, I was a fashion attorney in New York doing trademark copyright law, representing fashion houses like Christian Louboutin and Yves Saint Laurent and those types. But what I did when I moved is I said, I'm going to work backwards. I found attorneys whose lives looked the way I wanted mine to look. I found attorneys who were millionaires, who lived in other countries in the summer and then would stay in America during the winter or vice versa. And I went to them and I said, would you mentor me? And from that, I learned what I was good at, which was storytelling. And that's also how I found my practice area niche, which is personal injury and wrongful death, because it's all about whoever tells the better story.
Very interesting. I hope you guys are listening because every time, whether it be personal or professional advice, I always feel like I get some jewels whenever I talk to Attorney Symone. Well, thank
Yeah.
you for reintroducing may have already known a little bit about you, but for those this is their first time learning about you, again, you gave them a lot of jewels just there. Definitely some of our law students that are listening, I'm sure, will appreciate the few minutes we took to kind of get to know you as a lawyer. As you mentioned, you were already kind of in the spotlight as a child. Now, as an adult, you've been on television, OWN Network. You've been on television as a legal news correspondent. A little bit of what basically you're going to do with us here today. So,
Yes.
no further ado, we're going to jump right into our supersized episode of Hot Topics. So, starting off with Jonathan Majors. If you're listening and you're not familiar with his case, there were a couple of charges filed against him when he got into a fight with his girlfriend. And I think most of us have seen the tape of them kind of tussling a little bit right outside the car and then her chasing him for blocks. And obviously he used it as evidence to support hey, I'm not the aggressor, she isn't. And of course, he still was found guilty of not only recklessly defending himself, which I've never heard of, and
Ever.
also, and so he was defending himself too recklessly from her. And they also found him guilty of harassment, which I'm not sure because he actually went out of his way to not contact her, be in a separate apartment, not call her. So I don't know. These are the charges that were
Mhm.
rolled out. These are the charges that he was found guilty of, whether the facts match that or not. That like you said, it's all about the story, right?
Yes.
And so this is what the court believed happened, and it was recently announced during his sentencing that he would not receive any jail time, that he has to do some sort of counseling, You know, he's on probation, obviously, but there is no jail time. And so even with him getting no jail time, he's decided to still appeal the verdict, the guilty verdict. And
Absolutely. I would definitely do that and
yeah, he's
recommend
going to
it.
do that. And then also, he is now defending on the civil side some similar claims. So, what I wanted to just break down just briefly with Jonathan Majors. Number one, you were getting ready to hint to it. Why should he, you know, appeal something if it's over? There's no jail time. Why is it important that he appeal the verdict? And then two, explaining how a lot of times people will see what happens in the criminal trial first, and then they'll file a similar civil complaint with some of those similar type of claims like assault, because assault can be civil and criminal. So how sometimes people will wait and then they'll file it, and that's exactly what has happened here, and the benefits of how his ex is obviously doing that. So first, starting off, why should he be appealing a guilty verdict if he didn't get any jail time?
So here he should appeal because there were some rulings that the judge made that absolutely completely turned this case, and I feel lost it for him, that had those rulings not been made, he likely would have won. But also, those rulings potentially could have been wrong. So first, I'll start with explaining the harassment part. So the harassment component. So he was found guilty of harassment. And what's interesting in New York, harassment is not even a misdemeanor. It's considered a violation, meaning he wasn't subject to criminal jail time for that anyway. But the harassment was merely after she beat him up in the back of the SUV, and he stops the car. He tells the driver to stop the car so he can get out. She then begins to get out and run after him. He knows she's drunk, etc. He's already ordered the vehicle to take her to the house. He's getting out and he's going to get a hotel. The harassment is when, as she gets out, and
Mhm.
remind you, she'd just been hitting him, he puts her back in the SUV.
That's the
He puts her back in that.
harassment.
That's the harassment.
I thought that was
That's
maybe the well, I thought that was maybe the reckless defending himself.
no, baby. That's why they call me for the legal tea. That is the
That's the
harassment.
harassment. So what should he have done? I'm just trying to figure out what the court
That's what
would
I'm
have liked
saying.
him to do at
Because
that
first of
point.
all, when you're in a relationship, that's what I would want my man to do. If I'm drunk, if I'm being belligerent, etc., etc., it is safer for me to be in the vehicle, transported home, than for me to continue. But also, I saw it as a self-defense mechanism.
There you go.
But what's very interesting here is that his attorneys chose to use race as the theme. And
Mm,
I don't deny race absolutely played into a part. But what was difficult here is this was not a 12-person jury. It was a 6-person jury with perhaps one person of the 6 that may or may not have been Black. So it's very difficult to get a jury to see race as the issue when the majority of them have not necessarily experienced that, for one. But two, self-defense was never raised. And the second claim that he
mm,
was found guilty for was the recklessly, unintentionally hurting her finger when he was snatching back his own cell phone from her as she
mhm.
was beating him with it after finding out he had been cheating on her by
Right,
reading the phone.
right.
And and um and speaking with another attorney, that's a criminal attorney on that, that he made the great point that if you're going to raise self-defense, you have to take the stand. So it was
Oh,
likely his attorney discouraged him taking the stand. But in turn, he couldn't raise the self defense because you can defend yourself and you can defend yourself. So he would have been able to say, hey, it was reasonable of me to do this to get my phone back because she had already scratched me. He had photos of scratches to his hands, scratches and bleeding on his face,
he had the
bleeding from
driver's
his pillow.
testimony that
Yes.
she hit him. So he had enough if he wanted to raise it, but he would have had to take the
He
stand.
would have had to take stand because even the photos of his injuries were not admitted into court. So there was no evidence in front of the jury of the injuries he suffered, the scratches. He literally had scratches down his arms, the buttons on his jacket, leather jacket were ripped off. You gotta have some strength to rip off buttons on a leather
Well, let me
jacket.
ask you a quick question. They
Mm.
submit, but they had the video of him running. Why did they let that in? But they wouldn't let the pictures in.
Because the pictures he took himself. So you need someone who can
Oh, okay.
authenticate it. And
I
because the footage came from CCT footage,
CC.
they were
Got it.
able to submit it using, what we call a business record. Yes.
Record.
So
Mhm.
if those photos had been taken by a police officer, as an example, he
I
would
see.
not have had to take the stand. But because they came from his personal cell phone and were time and date stamped from his cell, he would
Mhm.
have needed to take the stand to authenticate them.
Wow. Okay. Well,
Hmm.
then the second point on Jonathan Majors, she is now filing, on a civil suit, right, with similar claims of assault and harassment. I think it also includes defamation, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just
Yes.
some similar claims that were obviously in the criminal. And it's almost like, well, you've already been found guilty. There's a higher standard. If you're listening, you're not a lawyer, you're not in law school. It's beyond a reasonable doubt with criminal law. With civil, it's typically what, like preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not.
Correct. It's basically like 51%.
Okay. So
That's all you generally need.
that's all you need. So if you've already gotten a guilty verdict, explain to our audience, like if someone's already got
Sure.
a guilty verdict with some of these similar claims, why it is kind of like a slam dunk to just go ahead and file a civil.
Absolutely. So generally what happens, yeah, if you've already been found guilty, that's generally like what we call prima facie, or basically the best evidence that it meets the standard, because the fact that the criminal standard is here, the civil standard is here. If
Mm-hmm.
you've already met this standard, you're going to meet this one. Is generally how that's done.
Very interesting.
Now here, so she has a strong chance of winning. Now, as well as the evidence and the testimony and so forth from the prior case will be admissible. However, here he can take the stand. He can take the stand now because he's not in the risk of any criminal issues for the most part, assuming the appeal at that point has been closed and concluded. He won't be because whatever he's going to say in that civil suit can't be used against him in a criminal case
That's good to
since
know.
the criminal case is concluded. So
Good to
he
know.
can get on the stand and say, she was beating the crap out of me. And the reason that I took the phone in that way is I was simply trying to get my phone back. And she had already done these things to me. This was self-defense. He can also say, hey, it's not harassment here because I was putting her back in the car because I know that she's a drunk. I didn't want her to wander the streets. I knew that the driver would safely take her home, and I was doing it to keep her safe. Now,
Basically, all the things if like you said, he could have said maybe in the criminal, he can at
yes,
least use this at his disposal in his civil in the civil.
yes.
At this
And
point.
even more importantly, and one of the other things that's very important is, so she's also claiming defamation, meaning he's been out here calling her a liar,
Mhm,
and basically the criminal case is the proof. This is now potentially going to allow her to bring in the prior not criminal, but the prior domestic incident that they had in London. Now, that is one of the other issues that could be on appeal. So, what I'm
mhm,
speaking about there were some text messages that were admitted into the case. And the gist of those text messages is it's an exchange between he and her where it implies that on a prior instance, he had injured her and that her head hurt so bad from whatever happened between the two of them that she wanted to go to the hospital. He
I
was
do recall that.
discouraging her from going to the hospital, saying, you can't do that. His words were, even if you lie, they still may not believe you.
Right,
But the problem is this: most people assumed those texts were from this incident. They
right.
were
They were
not.
from a
They were
different.
from 9 months prior. And the reason, and initially the court in the criminal case ruled they are not admissible. But
Mhm.
what happened was Jonathan Major's lawyer had asked her some questions on the stand and said, at no point did Jonathan ever discourage you from going to the hospital, did he? And she was like, yes. She was referring to the London incident. The attorney then used that to imply that she was lying in this incident. And therefore, the judge said he was now going to allow the text messages in to be able to show she's not a liar. She was just mistaken on the incident. As a result, that's probably going to be one of the major issues on appeal, is whether or not those texts should have been let in. Because I believe if those texts were not let in, it's
Mhm.
very likely the jury would not have found him guilty.
Right, because there wouldn't have been this kind of like previous instance of, oh, this is just a pattern, an ongoing pattern of your abuse. You did this thing in London, now you're
Right.
doing this thing in New York. It was almost like there's already some evidence that you were at least an abuser on another occasion. So this
Right.
was a long history of what you were doing to this woman. At least that's what it painted, right? So,
Right. Hmm.
so
And I'm
it's
going to say finally, oh, go ahead. I'll let
no,
you
no, no,
start.
no, no, definitely finish up, definitely.
Oh, and finally, with regards, he actually, I believe in the civil case, it's not necessarily a slam dunk. It's
Okay.
going to depend on how New York law falls on an issue that some states have comparative fault. There are different levels, but basically, what his lawyers can point to is the fact that her injuries and him, the so-called harassment or and so forth that she suffered, she was part to blame too. If she hadn't attacked him, if she hadn't taken his phone, and for example, in a state like Texas, the way it's structured is if they find that she is at least 51% responsible for what happened, 50 or 51, she doesn't get anything.
Mm.
So if a jury were to find that she has responsibility in why it turned out this way, then there's a
Mhm.
chance that he could win, in effect, because she wouldn't be able to get anything. It really just depends on how the law in the state falls
Works. Right.
into that. Mhm.
And here's the thing, I don't know if he's going to do this, but personally, if somebody's filing, I'm counterclaiming. I mean, we already here. So, I'm gonna you assaulted me. Like it's
Ooh,
not gonna be this one,
absolutely.
it's not gonna be this one-sided civil lawsuit. Like I would definitely also
Yeah.
counter. So
He should
we
do that for that, as well as remember when she was running through the streets, she
yeah,
stopped, met some strangers on a street corner, invited them to in front of the CVS, okay, invited them to a nightclub, and then used Jonathan Major's credit card to treat them all to bottles of champagne. So I will sue her for fraud and misuse of my credit card too.
wow. Yeah, I didn't see her going out and using the alleged, hurt hand to open up bottles, but wasn't sure whose card was being used. So yeah, I think at this point, if she's going to take it there civilly, he has the right to also take it there civilly. So we will be
Agreed.
watching this story. We really appreciate, your input on this story because, like I said, unfortunately, there are lawyers and non-lawyers circulating a lot of like misinformation about these types of cases. So we try to bring people on that actually know what they're talking about. So we appreciate your input. Moving on, also a case that's in well, do I want to say the case is in New York? Okay, it is in New York in the sense that our brother Diddy,
Yes.
from all over, Mr. Worldwide, Mr. Bad Boy Entertainment. If you've not been underneath, you had to be underneath the rock to not know what's going on with Diddy. There was an initial civil complaint last fall filed by Cassie Ventura, his ex-girlfriend, for a variety of things. But what was interesting about it, including, assault and some other things that she claims, I thought what was interesting, the complaint read almost like a criminal complaint. I mean, she put trafficking, she put certain buzzwords in there. And I said, uh-oh, this is feeling like R. Kelly. Because R. Kelly had the civil complaints and they were just civil. And he would either settle them or he would win them, but they always
I drafted one
contain
of them. I sued him in
they
New York.
always contain criminal allegations even though there were civil complaints. And I know it's written that way purposely because what it does is it gets the attention of, especially if it's trafficking, it gets the attention of, federal agencies, right? And so it doesn't mean it's going to happen right away, right? But in this
Correct.
case, it's like this complaint gets filed in fall. We're looking at the top of the year. His house is being raided for either crimes that occurred in his Miami or LA house, or evidence, either they actually occurred in those places or there's evidence of wherever he committed crimes. That evidence could have possibly been in those homes. Because I know some people were like, well, why these homes? Well, obviously there was some testimony and there's some complaints that are pointing to the fact that the evidence they need to support any charges, because I want to be clear, he has not been charged with anything. His children have not been charged with, no one has been charged with anything. Everything's up to this point
Correct.
civil, even including his son's recent assault lawsuit. It again, it's civil. So they're looking at, okay, I'm a prosecutor. We don't bring things unless we can take you down. So we're going to raid. And if we find what we feel like we need to find, plus the testimony and everything else we feel like we have, then there's enough to bring the charge. But again, it's been kind of quiet. They haven't said anything about actually finding any things in these raids. So just speak to maybe some general confusion about how the civil impacts the criminal, and what may be coming next for Diddy.
Right. So first, I want to be very clear. Um, Even if any of these people sign NDAs, it does not preclude them from being involved with any criminal investigation. I saw one blogger say that, oh, if they sign an NDA, they can only talk to the police if the police come to them first. Absolutely not. Because crimes are excluded from any time. You can never contract away your right to report a crime, whether it happened to you or you witnessed it, etc. So I just want to be clear for everyone on that. And as well, I feel that Cassie's complaint, it reads and feels a lot different than the Little Rod complaint. Little Rod is a producer who claims that after working for Diddy, producing beats for him for a year and a half, traveling and living with him, Diddy only paid him, I believe, $29,000. And the core of that one is, you didn't pay me my just wages, versus Cassie's is a variety of abuse and things like that. Now, Little Rod is saying, you didn't pay me my wages, as well as you forced me to be involved in sexual acts that I would have never done if you weren't my employer, and, uh, put me through these things.
Basically,
And
hostile work environment.
absolutely
That's
hostile work
basically how he
environment,
brought
all
it
of that.
in. Mm-hmm.
But the way that his reads in comparison to the other is, to say, it reads a lot more like blackmail. Because what Little Rod's complaint does that is different is he outlines specific crimes that were committed against other people, not him. For example, he speaks about RICO. RICO is the racketeering act that is used to bring down mob bosses. And RICO is an act that is basically used to really create an umbrella where if you are the lowest person in the organization, can be charged just as severely as the highest person. Now, that's compared to Cassie, who any of the criminal acts that she talks about were basically ones committed against her or against the people, like people that impacted her. So she talks about, rape. She talks about, one of her friends being hung off of a balcony. And so I say that to say, one of the things that I think we should look for and prepare for is, I anticipate in the Little Rod complaint, one of the allegations that may arise is going to be sanctions against his attorney for the way that his attorney has gone about pursuing these claims, including making a lot of allegations that Diddy's attorneys and the defendants' attorneys are claiming they're baseless allegations that are simply made to embarrass people and to cut in a check. And those defendants are out here to say, not us, we ain't cutting checks just because you're here to embarrass them. But what I do think is going to happen is those same allegations are going to result in criminal charges. I anticipate that before the end of the summer, Diddy will be charged criminally. I think what's taking so long is that they've got to go, they as in the feds, have to go through all of the evidence that they've seized from Diddy's house.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, Little Rod has now filed a second amended complaint, wherein he states that he saw himself that Diddy had security cameras in every single room in the house, including his own room, and he had no idea that there were hidden cameras in there, and these cameras could be used to watch people in doing intimate things and so forth. And those were some of the tapes that were seized by the feds. So if in fact there was drugs, if in fact there was sex with underage girls, those things are going to be on video. And I think that's what the feds are going to be spending the summer going through to decide exactly what and who will be charged with those things.
Definitely agree with you that it does read more like, you just didn't pay me. So while we here, I'm just gonna go ahead and embarrass you. And I'm gonna try to make my complaint kind of sound like Cassie. So it sounds like it's kind of like, well, if more than one person is saying it, it must be true. I think strategically his lawyer did do that by using certain similar buzzwords that were in Cassie's complaint. And I agree with you. I don't like the fact that it's almost like he's embarrassing other celebrities by like, well, I saw such and such doing this. And it's like, but what does that have to do with what happened to you? And I know he's trying to sort of make it seem like, well, it contributed to my hostile work environment, but you didn't have to mention what other
You didn't
people
have to
did.
say the name of the people, right?
Yeah.
That helps no one. It doesn't give you more credibility to name Young Miami. My issue is naming people you're not naming as defendants. Because if what happened between these people was so bad, name them as a defendant or leave it out. But the other, I think part of the legal tea with this one that we should watch out for is that I think that there's a risk that as hard as Little Rod's attorney is going, which is his name is Mr. Blackburn, if I'm correct, as hard as Mr. Blackburn's going, I think it could actually backfire on him from the perspective because I filed civilly against R. Kelly, and the accusations in the accusations in the complaint and the allegations, which were found to be true, they were criminal, although we were presuming it in civil court. But what happens, and I believe what's going to happen here, is Blackburn wants to use the risk of criminal charges to help push a settlement. And I think it's going to get the feds involved. And once criminal charges are filed, what happens is it stays the civil case. So that means that civil case could be stayed for 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, however long it takes to go all the way through and either get a jury verdict or have Diddy take a plea. Because of the fact that nobody's going to testify, a defendant's not going to testify, etc., in their civil case because it could be used against them in criminal. The point I make there is by going this route, it's going to prolong his ability to get justice for his client. However, as long as Diddy isn't, bankrupt or filed for bankruptcy, he can still get that money, but he effectively might be able to do what we talked about before, which is use a criminal guilty to then get a slam dunk in your civil case.
I agree. Like you said, it could work out, but it also could backfire. It could like delay you really getting what you want. Bottom line is money, right? You want money.
Right.
And
And
so
you want it soon. You don't want
you
to
want
have
it
to wait
soon. Yeah.
5-6 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think him and his lawyer or maybe they've considered it, but they're like, well, let's just roll the dice anyway. And yeah, like I said, this complaint definitely read a little differently. I do want to say for the record before we move on to our next hot topic that in addition to the Little Rod case, in addition to the Cassie Ventura case, there are actually 3 other lawsuits naming Puff and I'm sorry, Diddy and Bad Boy and their entities. And I know these companies all have insurance, and Cassie was probably paid our insurance policy, but insurers are not going to continue to insure just every single lawsuit that comes along. And so I
Right.
just don't know without insurance, even if he wanted to settle, like, because it just seems like at this point, whether it happened or not, it's like the Me Too movement. Now it's
Yeah.
almost believable whether it happened or not. And so he is drowning in civil lawsuits. Bad Boy Entertainment and its parent companies are drowning with him in these lawsuits. And so it should just be interesting to see
Mhm.
how all of these civil lawsuits, obviously Cassie's is settled, but the remaining 4, how they pan out. And then
Yes.
obviously, if he's actually ever, arrested, like you said, they're probably as we're speaking, looking through what they feel like they need to look through to support a charge. Because again, if whether you're a lawyer or non-lawyer, listen to this. Prosecutors typically do not charge you unless they can at least get you guilty on one thing. They do not waste
That's
their time.
right.
They don't want to be embarrassed. So it's not always 100%, but typically if they're bringing it, it's because, okay, we can probably, out of all these charges, we can get at least one,
Yeah.
something will stick. And so it should be interesting to see if that step is taken. You heard it first. If it happens at the end of the summer, Attorney Symone, where everyone already predicted that. So you heard it first. If it, for some reason, it happens by the end of the summer. Moving from New York a little further down south, there are a few cases I just wanted to quickly go over because it's just been constantly on Shade Room, constantly circulating. Kevin Hart has filed something against Tasha K and also his assistant in California. And I know with Tasha K, it's an extortion where he alleges that, her team approached and said, hey, well, if you give me X amount of dollars, this interview of your ex-assistant talking about all these things won't go up. And then as it relates to assistant, you don't have to talk too much about extortion because I think people understand what extortion
Yeah.
is. But in terms of the assistant going on this interview, in interviewing, Tasha K has been known to be sued by Cardi B and things like that. I think she learned her lesson to let the person talk and her not say anything. to continue to keep the word allegedly in her mouth. You can tell she learned this time around because the judge sided with her, at least temporarily, and the video is not being taken down. They asked, he asked for a restraining order to have it taken down. The judge sided with her. But as it relates to his assistant, I think people are not understanding, like, well, she, in this case, she really did sign an NDA and she is breaking it. Is there any way around when you truly, again, this is not, criminal, is there any way around her saying that she could still say what she needs to say and she's not in breach of the NDA that she signed in exchange for, like, I think like an extra 30,000 a year? She signed, like, there was an exchange for that NDA. So, like, I don't know why she's so confident that she can just do this and not like the NDA. It's just a little confusing. So
right, I'm excited to see her response as well. And I'll admit, I have not seen the most recent pleadings in this. So if she is now filed a response outlining that, I apologize, I haven't seen it. But just generally, some of the exceptions to an NDA would be any criminal offenses that you've seen. And if they're criminal, but what she's been talking about, to my knowledge, hasn't been anything criminal.
Well,
It's been
I will say one of the criminals, because you let a light bulb go off in my head. So, like I said, civilly, she's just been saying he's having affairs and all that. Nobody cares. Everybody knows Kevin Hart cheats. His wife knows he cheats.
Oh, everybody knows.
Right, everybody
His
knows.
wife was a mistress, allegedly.
Right. So we're just at this point, to your point, that's all like civil stuff. She accused him of like insurance fraud. Like he was the one driving in the car. There was a car accident. He got out, went on the other side. So that is a crime, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. Insurance fraud is a crime. So she can talk about insurance fraud. She can, anything that's a crime, she can talk about it. She can stand on the street corner with a megaphone like a Black Israelite, okay, and profess the word of the Lord, okay, to talk about any crimes and not be in violation of the NDA.
Now, are there any other exceptions to an NDA, like other than crimes that off your top of your head?
Off the top of my head, that's the main one. But the other part would be as well with NDAs, you have to be given additional compensation for the signing of the NDA over and above whatever your salary was going to be. And so if her salary was $100K to be his assistant, then he was going to need to pay her an extra, I believe they talked about an extra $30,000.
Right, in exchange for that NDA per year.
Mm-hmm. And he would need to, he would have needed to pay that completely. I think there were rumors that he may have stopped or did not complete all the payments. If that happened, that also could be grounds for her to be able to say what she wants to say without being in breach, because if he stopped paying, that means he breached first.
Ah, interesting. See how we learned it. We learned it. Yes, because I know I do recall that. I do recall her saying that there were times where they would have like up and down periods with his productions and everyone getting paid, and there were times that even her health insurance, he would stop her health insurance. So yeah, she definitely.
There we go. Those are the two. Got it. And that is legitimate grounds.
If she's talking about criminal stuff, she's, you're not paying the lady, you're not paying her to get the NDA, then yeah, those are, I just realized, like you said, it's contractual. There has to be, what is it? What's the exchange? It has to be
offer and acceptance.
Offer and acceptance, but there has to be, what is it? Acceptance. Consideration. I think of taco. Yes. Terms, exactly.
Consideration.
I think of taco. So that's an acronym. If you're not in law school, you're like, why is she talking about taco? But it's terms, acceptance, offer, consideration. So yeah, the consideration would have been the $30,000. So if that wasn't being paid, that would be a reason. So if you listen to child, we just gave you some free legal advice, former Kevin Hart assistant. If you're not already represented, but yeah, that definitely would be a reason. Last story in Atlanta, we have Tayana Taylor and her soon-to-be ex-husband, Iman Shumpert. I'll be honest, it's kind of sad because they were one of these goals couples, right? They had a reality show. They had all these businesses. He was a basketball player, but he was getting into acting. She was a singer who was also getting into acting and was obviously a choreographer. They just seem to have it all. And so I think I think what's interesting about this case, they actually only used their initials in the beginning. So no one knew that they were getting a divorce. And I actually didn't know that you're allowed to just use your initials. I did not know that. But then he went and decided to respond to something and use their full names. And the minute he did that, which I don't know if he needed permission to do that, but the minute he used their full names, everyone knew they were getting a divorce. And it's just been one thing after another. And so I know that the biggest issue right now is one, him draining the bank accounts, and two, not taking care of the children in the way that she wants him to take care of them. So just first start off with draining bank accounts. I know you don't necessarily do family law, but they're technically still married. They're not divorced. They clearly have joint accounts, but she's accusing him of like draining the accounts for large
Right.
sums. I mean, you're technically not divorced, so you could drain it. He could drain it. Is it a free
That's
for
true.
all? Is
So
it
that's true. Either party can access and use the money in divorce. In fact, I've dealt with friends who were ready to file for divorce against their partner, and I was like, look, contact a family lawyer in your state, but take as much as you think you're going to need for the next 6 months. Because, honey, once you file, he ain't giving you jack, nothing.
right?
But here and how it works is if draining of the bank accounts is considered community waste. Community, as in the resources of both partners, are considered a part of the community of assets. And so, in the end, instead of there being a 50-50 split, as an example, if it's found that you wasted the resources, maybe in the end, whatever's left, the other party gets 60%, you only get 40 or 30, or you could end up with almost nothing. Basically, you could later be penalized depending on how you use the money and what was done. Now, interestingly, I pulled some of the documents. So that's the other thing. Some people be like, how does she know that she's speculating? First of all, I can read and do. Okay. And so
Right.
one of the interesting things in the documents that were filed there is that the documents that each party filed with the court stated that Iman earns approximately $47,000 per month, and Tiana earns approximately $100,000 per month. Now they're now each residing in separate places, but she's a breadwinner there and had been for quite a while. And so sometimes what often will happen, especially because Iman initially was the breadwinner for many years while he was playing in the league. But often what happens is when guys stop playing, their income changes, but their lifestyle choices don't. They still want the private jets. They still want, the very expensive bottle service, the luxury trips and so forth. And so it appears that a portion of what they're referring to as the draining is that his income diminished by multiples, but his spending did not. And then you also referenced Tiana had some concerns about just him raising and rearing the children in ways that she had concerns about. Pull
Right.
those
So
records too.
there were a couple examples. So if you're in the audience,
Yes.
I'll let you break them down. But first,
Mhm.
it was him moving on and dating, like having other partners and those partners being around the children. I know sometimes a temporary order can be put in place that like you can only do this if XYZ, right? Like I don't think that's been put in place. So he's actually technically free to date. But she's like, hey, I don't know if I want these people around my children. She also feels like he smokes too much weed around them. She feels like he's put them in Ubers and he shouldn't have. I mean, it's just been one filing after another. So just speak to some of those things in terms of, can
Sure.
Tana really control these things?
Right. And so oftentimes what you may see is that like sometimes the dads may want 50-50 because in many states, if you have 50-50 custody, you may not have to pay any child support, which can be convenient. But if you're going to do 50-50, you have to be equally as responsible. So one of the concerns that Tiana has the ability to impact and have control over is there was an allegation that on one of the overnight visits, because her daughter Junie, we know Junie is grown. Okay, Junie is like our internet niece, and Junie revealed that Daddy had over a woman and her daughter. The daughter was around Junie's age, and that both the woman and the daughter spent the night. That the woman slept in Daddy's bed, and that the door was open at some point in the evening, and that she saw the woman laying in Daddy's bed. And that made Tiana uncomfortable, very much understandably, because in a children's mind, they don't know the difference between divorce, not divorce. And more specifically, in this particular case, there was a filing that was done where both parties agreed that they wanted to stay means halt the divorce, because they were going to give themselves 3 months to try and work everything out and stay together. They gave themselves actually through last September to do that. Apparently, at the end of that period, it didn't work out and they resumed things. I say that to say part of the concern may be confusing the children by having not just an overnight person who we don't know if that's his girlfriend or not, but her and the child. And are there different women? Now, many people may not realize, here's some legal tea, that if you are married, let's say, not even married or unmarried, you have the right to petition the court to ask for the court to add a provision to the visitation order that says when you have the children, no overnight guests of the same sex, that are romantic interests can be there from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. or whatever the general hours are for your state. I have a homegirl. She was a mistress. She started dating her boss, and the boss left his wife and moved in with her when the wife put him out and everything. And the wife in the divorce, even though they were already living together, the wife said, "You cannot have my kids in a house overnight." Had that provision in there. As a result, the two of them had to move out. He had to get his own place because otherwise he'd have to get an apartment. He'd have to get like a hotel or something each weekend he had his sons. So I say that to say what Tiana is concerned about is actually standard. You can ask for provisions to protect you. And so long as the other person isn't married to the person, you have the right to control whether or not they actually live with a significant other while they have your kids.
Interesting. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think that was the bigger one. I think,
Yeah.
parents, I mean, there are a lot of young parents that smoke marijuana. There are a lot of parents that use Ubers for their kids. I just think for her, she was creating a laundry list of things that she wasn't comfortable with. And, it is hard, when you're not completely divorced and there really isn't an order in place on how you do what you do with the kids and
Right.
what he does with the kids. So I think also a recommendation is maybe some sort of temporary custody order be put in place, in addition to maybe a guardian ad litem, and that way the kids also have their own representative,
Yes.
kind of like their own lawyer. So I'm
Great
sure if
idea.
I'm sure if that's not in the works, it will be in the works since it appears that they cannot cordially figure this out. Um, again, I know you have to run. We appreciate you just coming in, and again, like you said, not only do you know how to read, you actually read. You actually look at the cases. We appreciate that you bring the information, you analyze it, you do it in such a great way. And I know anybody that's listening to this that was wondering about any of these cases, they're definitely brought up to speed now. And yes, all of these cases are still kind of ongoing. So we will continue to monitor them. We hope to have you back in the near future. And until
Love
next
to.
time, we're rooting for everyone Black. Take care, everyone. Okay.
Oh, can I add real quick where to find
Oh,
me?
sure, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So I always love to have new followers and to share more knowledge and information. I am a professor at all times. So if you'd like more legal information, more of these little tidbits and legal tea, feel free to follow me on Instagram at attorney Symone Redwine, as well as on my YouTube channel, which is Girl, Is That Legal? And then weeknights, you can catch me along with Al Reynolds breaking down celebrity legal cases on YouTube on my channel, Girl, Is That Legal? We usually do that weeknights at 8:30 p.m. Central or 6:30 p.m. Pacific.
Okay, great. And you are on Instagram. You are attorney Symone Redwine, correct? Your full name is
That's correct.
attorney. So that's where you can follow her and find all her links. As always, we're rooting for everyone Black. Take care, everyone.